Hello everyone, our topic today is the lasting effects of solitary confinement. Solitary confinement is a system where prisoners will hopefully rehabilitate through the use of isolation. And our argument is while this system has been shown to have some positive effects like potentially reducing violence in some locations, it has ultimately shown to negatively affect the people who administer it and the inmates themselves, and will require some reform in the near future.
Alright, so it's been very clear that solitary confinement is an ineffective resource and is mostly ineffective in helping those who are forced to practice it. As seen here, this practice contributes to many detrimental effects, all of them being negative. Suicidal or chronic depression and suicidal thoughts are very prominent throughout those who are currently serving solitary confinement. These effects become so severe to the point that many inmates take their own lives while still serving confinement. In fact, according to Scientific America, about half of all prison suicides occur to those who are in isolation, which also according to Scientific America adds up to around 2,000 people just in 2014 alone. This is insane. Those who do make it out of solitary confinement suffer from intense, irreversible mental issues such as uncontrollable anger, which often leads to more violence and recidivism. More violence and eventually recidivism, which is the tendency of a convicted criminal to reoffend and land themselves back into the big house. The failure of prisoners to properly rehabilitate post-confinement is so probable to the point of them never being able to function regularly again. Solitary confinement is so ineffective that it not only tortures prisoners to the point of mental breakage, if not killing them in the process, but it also releases the now violent convicts back into society, just for them to cause more trouble and land themselves back into prison. And the cycle will probably continue until death.
In European countries like the Netherlands, France, and Belgium, isolation has been implemented in order to de-radicalize suspected and confirmed terrorists. Meanwhile, in the United States, isolation is used as a form of retribution, basically meaning, I swear I have that, I'm sorry. Uses it as a means of retribution, an ideology that wishes simply to take criminals out of society. The rights of the prisoners is also an issue, as under the United Nations General Assembly on Human Rights, under Article 5, everyone should have an attorney or should have access to an attorney while in prison. But, however, a lot of places don't do this. In fact, they ignore that possibility. And so inmates in solitary confinement can be ignored for having an attorney. And this is in usually third world countries, though. Which can also bring up, is isolation actually legal? So under solitary confinement past 15 days can be detrimental to human health and can be seen as inhumane. Basically meaning it can be illegal under international law because it is inhumane towards another person.
Now, solitary confinement has both many physiological and psychological effects at play here. Now, in fact, even from the beginning of the separate state system in the 1900s, medical research has concluded that isolation has a negative effect on the human body. According to Grossin and Friedman in 1986, they stated a list of gastrointestinal, cardiovascular, and genitourinary problems, migraine headaches, and profound fatigue. On top of that, many inmates also experience symptoms similar to those of hypertension, which are stated here on the board. While even more reported are the psychological effects. And first, we have sensory deprivation, which is basically the oversensitivity to normal stimuli, let's say such as the sound of a closing door, which help contribute to an inmate not being able to sleep well. This is due to the fact that small movements or small sounds will inhibit an inmate from functioning properly, since that same sound is repeated again and again in their same head. Now, another important thing is that apart from all the way to hallucinations to perceptual disturbances, there's also chronic depression. And according to Dr. Haney, who wrote on the mental health issues in long-term solitary and supermax confinement, 62% of the men in solitary confinement for more than 10 years said that they felt close to an impending breakdown, while only 4% of the maximum security prisons seemed to felt that way. This means that over half the people in solitary confinement have had some experience with mental degradation or emotional breakdown, which of course will lead to depression and eventually frequent suicides.
So solitary confinement has proven to have both positive and negative effects on prisons themselves. Its use has helped in reducing prison violence across various supermax prisons across the United States. These are more maximum security prisons for more dangerous inmates. However, this use of this system has created new costs to the traditional prison system. For example, it seems to cost $75,000 to $78,000 per prisoner. Also, a study by researchers at the Urban Institute studied and analyzed the costs of solitary confinement in various supermax prisons. They found costs could include construction, which could be up to $500,000, equipment, training prison officers to carry out this system, and various utility expenses like water, heating, and electric. Solitary confinement has shown to negatively affect prisons through these costs, creating a benefit to cost ratio of 0.72.
Okay, some statistics about the recent decrease in solitary confinement. In 2013, the Yale Research Institute conducted a study to see how many prisoners were in solitary confinement at the time. At the time, it was 80,000 prisoners, and when they did the study again in 2015, there were 100,000 prisoners studied to be in solitary confinement. This influx of prisoners came along with an influx of the different problems that we have mentioned earlier that have surfaced. Because of these negative effects, governments around the world have tried to eliminate the use of solitary confinement where it can be and where it needs to be. An example of this is in Texas, where in April of 2017, they released a bill stating that the prisoners who have served their time in solitary confinement and have been declared legally rehabilitated should be put back into the regular prison population or released from prison entirely. However, this bill left 4,000 prisoners untouched, leaving 4,000 prisoners with the negative effects of solitary confinement. Another example is in Canada, and their correctional service had a hypothesis to test that the inmates in solitary confinement are the reason for prison violence, or prison riots. To test their hypothesis, they put the prisoners from solitary confinement back into the public population of the prisons They put the prisoners back into the public prison to see if they caused more violence, and they did not. So they removed the solitary confinement where it needed to.
Some of these solutions for this are simply taking away solitary confinement as a whole, but you can also shorten the time in solitary confinement from however many days it might be, from years, decades, maybe months, to 15 days or less. Basically, it takes away the detrimental effects of solitary confinement. Or you can simply, or you can give prisoners in solitary confinement more helpful programs, such as access to psychiatrists, therapists, so on. Anything to help them get out and back into society and not back in prison.
Some limitations of our solutions is that for the releasing of prisoners from solitary confinement in their time, a limitation would be that there would be no guarantee that they would be completely rehabilitated, because each prisoner is given their certain amount of time to spend to see if they are rehabilitated yet. Another limitation is that the programs that prisoners may be offered could be too costly for the prisons, and the prisons might go into debt.
Okay. So now that the project's finished, Emery, what, if anything, do you consider to be the gap in your team's research?
The gap in our team's research would probably be where the figures, as in like numbers and such. Elijah did a good job covering the decrease in solitary confinement, but there's just simply too much numbers or data to cover. Also with Dylan, he covered prison in different countries, and there's just simply too many countries to effectively go over in a 8-minute presentation.
So describe an argument from one of your peers' individual reports, Shiv, that made you think differently about the solution.
Well, in Elijah's case, he had a paper on decreasing solitary confinement, and there was a case in Canada where it actually helped in rehabilitating prisoners, which contrasted with a lot of our other research and our other thoughts about solitary confinement. We thought it was completely worthless and completely ineffective in completely rehabilitating prisoners, but it turned out that in some cases it actually did.
Okay. So what was the strongest counter argument to the solution you guys came up with?
The strongest counter argument for us is the cost that prisons would introduce for including the inmates back into prison rehabilitation, because Shiv's paper told us that the effects on the prisons themselves and not so much the inmates. So we got a clear perspective of how solitary confinement may affect the prisons.
Okay. So reflecting on your colleagues' work, which one had the greatest impact on your overall understanding of your topic?
Well, to me personally, I felt that a lot of Elijah's and Dylan's were very impactful for me because, and also Shiv's, of course, because of the price that it takes to maintain solitary confinement and in prisons. And as Elijah and as Dylan covered, there are many other methods of solitary confinement that are much more effective than those compared in the United States.
Okay. So describe how the content of the whole presentation changed based on group discussion.
It changed based on was it actually good? Like what are the actual good parts of solitary confinement that can be used, and is getting rid of it actually viable?
Okay. All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
I like hearing